Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of our lecture on chapter 11. So again, we're talking about community policing and drugs, and this is going to be part 2. And I'll try to keep it as short as I can, but there is a lot of information to get out there to you. So we left off, if you recall, talking a little bit about law enforcement's ability to deal with the drug problem, and I'm going to back up. Remember, we left off talking about the healing America's drug users, talking about is it worth spending billions of dollars attacking the drug supply, and there are critics that argue that it's just too costly and ineffective, and that we should be focusing more on drug treatment programs, which I think is true because there is empirical evidence that does support the argument that substance abuse treatment is a sound public investment. But I also think that the other prong, if you will, we still need to have avenues of enforcement. So how does law enforcement disrupt that market? And how do we basically do that? Well, a comprehensive approach to the drug problem includes not only prevention and treatment, those things we just talked about, but also efforts at stopping the drug sales and use. That's the third core component. Okay, so remember we talked about those three core components listed in the National Drug Control Survey. The first one that we'll talk about will be drug raids. And in the 1980s, drug raids made frequent headlines. We had these cool looking tank-like vehicles, which we still have right now. They're called Bearcats. We actually, in the olden days, used to use converted armored vehicles or armored cars, but then we got a little more sophisticated, and vehicle manufacturers came up with these cool Bearcat things that you can see that have the place where the officers can stand on the outside. They have an inside, they have lights, they have all the tools and everything you can carry inside, and they have a turret which you can see that opens at the top. So we had these tank-like vehicles, and SWAT teams and sophisticated weapons all have been involved in drug raids. And honestly, they are very successful when they are used properly. An internet search of drug raids, if you were to run that, produced nearly 25 million results, highlighting the magnitude of the drug problem in our society. And many of the search results were newspaper stories of such raids carried out in communities across the country. I mean, so just all over the place. So, I mean, there's just a lot of it going on out there. And I brought a couple of photos that you can see some SWAT teams both before and after a search warrant. So if you've ever wondered, hey, what's a SWAT team? What do they wear? What do they look like? What kind of tools? Well, again, I talked about that Bearcat. That's this vehicle right here. It has the turret in the top, so an officer can hide behind this and get a long rifle out there. They do have canines on the SWAT teams, and they wear all this cool fatigue-looking equipment. And some of the things that they find, the reason they dress like that and have all those tools would be because of what they're getting. And you talk about disrupting the market, look at what they're seizing. Money, rock cocaine, methamphetamine. I mean, here's a bunch of rock cocaine packaged here, and they hide it. The suspects will hide it in these fake containers. But wherever you see drugs, you're going to see guns. And you can see that you've got firearms here. You've got big bags of money and all the cocaine here, marijuana and other drugs and cocaine and meth. And you've got guns and guns. I mean, so everywhere you look, when you put these drugs together, you see guns. That's why it's so pervasive in society right now. And here are some larger seizures as you start to get away from some of the lower street level dealers and you start to get up into those remember transnational groups we were talking about that are basically smuggling in all these drugs. And again, with drugs and money, you're going to see weapons because they're going to want to defend their territory, or those that are also in the drug war, and also law enforcement. So you have to kind of consider that too. So one of the ways that we use or another way I should say, besides drug raids would be surveillance. And surveillance is where you gather information about people, their activities, and their associates. And a very common type of surveillance is called a stakeout. You've probably heard of that before. And this is a stationary surveillance where officers set up an observation area and they monitor something or they watch it. Now, there are other types of surveillance like aerial surveillance, even more so with drones now and stuff. But you can use airplanes and helicopters, etc. There's audio surveillance. There's wiretapping, where you're actually getting a search warrant and you're listening in on a conversation. There's video surveillance and a host of other technology type developments that are out there. So surveillance is quite the thing that's out there. Now, understand when you talk about surveillance, you really have to kind of bring in a good understanding about the Fourth Amendment. Remember, the Fourth Amendment provides in part that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizure shall not be violated. So when we talk about that, we just have to understand that as we do these surveillances and things, that we stay within the guidelines of that Fourth Amendment. And another interesting surveillance technique, which I'm not sure if I'm going to get into, would be GPS. It is increasingly being used as a surveillance tool to catch not only drug dealers, but also robbers, sexual predators, murderers, a lot of times without a warrant or even a court order. I mean, after all, it's pretty easy for the police to put a GPS tracker on a car without the driver ever knowing about it. However, unsanctioned ability of the police to use this type of method of surveillance was brought to a halt in a case, a U.S. Supreme Court case by the name of United States versus Jones in 2012, when the Supreme Court held that using GPS to surveil a person actually constituted a search within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment, and because of that, it required a warrant. So just, we need to, again, understand those issues that can arise from the different types of surveillance. And another type of surveillance would be the use of a sting. And in this particular case, talking about drugs, it'd be the use of a drug sting. It's another strategy that police have used to reduce the demand for drugs. And one of the criticisms of a drug sting would be the fact that it might be entrapment. And we'll talk a little bit later on, I think, about what entrapment might be. We talked a little bit about GPS, so we kind of know that. So and I have a link to the case there if you want. We talked about other types of surveillance, and this is more GPS, talking about the Carpenter versus United States case, a very important case that you should know that talks about tracking of an individual's cell phone. And then again, we have all these other types of surveillance and counterterrorism type things like closed circuit TV and monitoring of certain areas. We even have things like license plate readers. This is a device that's on some police cars that will automatically run license plates as you basically drive down the street. So all of these things. Drones is another thing when we start talking about the different types of surveillance that's out there. What are the laws surrounding that? And we need to keep mind within the Fourth Amendment. And then using optics and different things like that. Here's a picture of a surveillance van. If you've never seen the inside of a van, it looks kind of like a normal van on the outside. They're not all white. They paint them different colors, but inside they have all of these camera systems and monitoring devices and radios and other types of technology. So undercover assignments, this would be another type thing that we use to disrupt the market, if you will, on the law enforcement end. And it would be used to obtain information and evidence. So there's a couple of terms out there. Most undercover assignments are used, again, to obtain information and evidence about illegal activity when it can be obtained in no other way, meaning like we can't find it any other way. So we might have to have officers go undercover Um, the term light cover involves a little bit of deception, but the officer goes home at the end of shift, so maybe they pretend to be a drug buyer, and that's really it. Now, deep cover is much more dangerous. This is, in deep cover, the officer kind of lives or assumes the identity of whoever they're trying to infiltrate. So they might try to infiltrate a biker gang, so they're going to pretend to be a biker for a year, maybe even longer, to get close in there, to get more information. And again, this is where the officer really sometimes doesn't go to the police department for a year at a time, because they're so deep undercover. So they assume the identity of of that particular gang or group or whatever, to get inside or infiltrate in order to get more information. Now, regardless of whether the cover is light or deep, such work requires a very carefully crafted persona and a lot of self-discipline. And the DEA recommends that undercover officers keep their real first names in case they are greeted by someone on the street who doesn't know they're working undercover. So if somebody walked up to you and said, "Hey, Tony," or something like that, then I would respond to that, and they would know me by Tony. So that kind of makes sense, right? Um, it's also advisable for undercover officers to keep their real birth dates. So a couple of things they keep naturally, but again, this is kind of undercover operations, and there's a couple of movies, and even books like Serpico, or William Queen, who basically went inside of a undercover biker gang, and these are really good movies, and they're all true stories of undercover agents who infiltrated these different types of groups. When we talk about larger groups, here's a photograph that I can share to you from the Rialto Police Department Narcotics Unit. And these are things that they find inside of houses. When you look at the house, great lawn, beautiful home, not a stick of furniture in that house. And it's because it was a stash pad for marijuana, cocaine, and other types of illicit narcotics. And these are the things that we basically seize. And being part of a narcotic unit, you want to have different, what's a good word, ethnicities and genders, because you want to be able to blend into the group that you're trying to work with or infiltrate. So a lot of times we'll have different individuals with different talents, different ethnicities, and different genders, if you will. And I'm pretty sure that makes sense. Here's a photo of our officers inside of a large marijuana grow inside of a house, and they love to take pictures, of course. Here's another one, and you can see all the lights and heat sensors and foil and things to keep the place all warm. Here's a large marijuana bust that they got. So, I mean, just a couple of photos on what's going on. And again, more of a street level, but there's guns and money and dope and everything like that. And then finally, here's a really good heroin bust with a lot of cash. And the two officers that typically work that. Now, again, we talk about gender. It's always good to have both male and female officers, because you really don't know who you're going to be working with or trying to infiltrate. And you have to be able to play the part, if that makes any sense. So again, you want to have a well-rounded kind of unit. All right, arresting dealers. So the traditional response to users and sellers has been to arrest them when possible. The current anti-drug campaign has increasingly focused on law enforcement attacking the supply side. So the traffickers, if you will. Again, though, the traditional has been to arrest both the users and sellers. Most agencies focus their efforts on drug dealing and the dealers, and the increasing prosecution of drug dealers as well. So this is kind of focusing on everybody involved. And when you look at drug dealers, I mean, we're not going to get stereotypical here, and they come in all shapes and sizes, and both ethnicities and gender. Sometimes you get pictures off of Facebook, but you can see that they're all about the money here. And a lot of times when there's money, again, and dope, there's going to be guns. So these are the folks that we're after, that are selling all the drugs to kids and that are making all this kind of money, and they really don't even care. They don't really don't even care. Um, so, a little bit deeper, talking a little bit more again on arresting the drug users. Busting people for use, not trafficking, has its critics. A lot of times we arrest a lot of the users to try to get the market down, if you will, to discourage the sellers. A quote from Hubert Williams of the Police Foundation said it like this: if we want to use the standard of the number of people we arrest, about 1.7 million each year, these numbers only deal with quantity, not quality. We need a new focus that does not focus on the ghetto and the inner city. And really what he's trying to say is, should we arrest the users, or is that more of an addiction type thing, or should we go more for the traffickers, if you will? And users, again, I talked earlier about, when you talk about identification, we talked about meth users and heroin users using the needle. Well, there are things that are identifiable. So look, if you look at these pictures of people's arms here, you can tell that this one up here in the upper left, this user has been using for a while. He's got some broken blood vessels. It's all kind of messed up in here. Same with here, you can see some scabbing. Some scabs indicate, maybe 3 to 5 days ago. Sometimes you can see some oozing. If you see any oozing coming out, then that's a little more recent. But as they kind of break these veins or pop these veins or ruin these veins, they start to do this over a period of time. Here on the upper right, you can just see them starting to scab over a little bit. This arm doesn't look too bad. And here's a picture of somebody actually injecting. Methamphetamine, we talked about the way that you can sometimes use some visual signs of a meth user, whether it's their lips tend to be a little bit burnt, or the end of the fingertips because they smoke their drugs through a pipe. Same with a cocaine user. But meth really starts to do a number on somebody's face. And if you look here, this is from a sheriff's department. You can see this is a booking, 2003, 2007. Same person, but this methamphetamine has started to wear on them. 2005, a year and a half later, and you can see the abuse to the body. A lot of times they don't eat, so they might start to become a little emaciated, which means that they're getting kind of skinny in the face and maybe even in other places. This is a 4-year difference right here. Here's a 1-year difference. So, again, that's why methamphetamine is really so, so volatile, and I don't want to skip past this one thing here, because the question I want to ask here is, can we arrest our way out of the drug problem? Some people say yes, but honestly, some people say no. So how do we improve this? We talked about some ways. We talked about, drug raids. We talked about surveillance, and these are things that law enforcement does in order to deal with the drug problem. We talked about surveillance again. We talked about undercover assignments and arresting the dealers and the users. Well, now let's talk about improving our intelligence. So if police can enlist the help of citizens to provide information about drug dealing, there's a lot that can get accomplished. And honestly, it can be done through things like community surveys or tip lines. We can now do it online. Maybe debriefing people that are coming out of jail, having informants. Law enforcement works closely with informants, both paid and unpaid. And having our narcotics units or officers working with those frontline patrol officers. But if we can get the help of our citizens, we really can get some things done, because citizens know where drug dealing is taking place. The cops can't be everywhere. And if citizens can be encouraged to report this information, police can concentrate their efforts on those locations receiving a lot of complaints. And the police patrol officer should really avoid going higher than the street dealer. This information, typically we like to kind of push up to the narcotics unit and have them so they can get behind the scenes and go undercover and do some of those other things that we kind of talked about. And if you've never seen what a drug deal kind of looks like when we're talking about combating street level sales of narcotics, this is kind of what it looks like. So an officer would testify in court as to what a drug deal looks like. Somebody handing somebody something, somebody handing them money. It gives the appearance of a drug deal. But this is part of disrupting the market. How do we deal with that? Because we know that as we start to do certain things and deal with certain strategies, maybe shutting down some drug houses, working closely with the DA's office, those are things that we can do. So, talking about again disrupting the market, various strategies have been used to tackle the drug problem in public housing areas where we do tend to have some issues. Often efforts on improving the physical environment work, like lighting and fences or limited access or keys or cards that can help. But establishing a relationship with the public housing authorities that work in that area and knowing some of the housing codes can also help local law enforcement deal with it. Same with apartment complexes. They do tend to harbor drug markets in there. There's a couple of terms. Open drug market. This is where dealers will sell to any potential customer and eliminate those suspected of being police. Now, a closed drug market, those are dealers that sell only to people that they know or who have been vouched for by another buyer. So those, again, so the open drug market is, unless they, if they think you're a cop, they won't sell, but anybody else they'll sell to. But that closed drug market is one where they actually know you. You are a repeat customer or somebody has vouched for you. I kind of wanted to go into a couple of other environmental hazards as we start to kind of finish this up, because these are really important. And specifically, it's around methamphetamine. And a lot of the challenges when we talk about dealing with methamphetamine. So meth labs have three main dangers associated with them: injury from explosion, fires, chemical burns and toxic fumes. Number two, environmental hazards. And number three, child endangerment. So, when we talk about challenges to labs, we have to talk about identifying a lab, going inside, how do we process it, how do we clean up all those nasty chemicals, and then that physical, chemical, and toxic hazards. But you need to know that methamphetamine labs typically have three main dangers. That's the explosions, the fires, the chemical burns, the fumes. Number two, the environmental hazards, and then number three, the endangerment of people that live there. So, I put in here a little published article title from a newspaper in 2018. So 2 women arrested after Texas apartment meth lab explodes with child inside. So some of these people that are manufacturing this stuff, their kids are still in there. That's where the child endangerment happens. Okay, so either mom or dad or both are manufacturing meth, and they have, pets and kids and other stuff inside there, and then things tend to happen. Things like this, where a meth lab will catch on fire and basically burn the house down or kill people inside of it. And even really nice homes that look like kind of a normal individual, if you will, lives there, but they've got this meth lab in the garage and it catches fire. A lot of times trailers or mobile homes, same thing. So they have these labs in all different neighborhoods and in all different environments, and even sometimes in vehicles. We talked about those portable labs where they'll transport chemicals and things, and this is something that could happen where even the vehicle kind of burns down. And we talk about fumes and fires and chemical burns and etc. Mixing chemicals in these meth labs creates, again, the risk of explosion, fires, burns, fumes, and all that stuff. And a lot of the labs, the people doing this, they don't take basic lab safety precautions. They're not going to, because they're doing it illegally. And here are, again, is some recovered evidence from a portable lab or a smaller lab. And you can look at the stuff. You've got brake fluid, borax, paint thinner, lacquer, propane, aluminum foil, iodized salt, drain cleaner. I mean, you name it. This is the stuff that they use to make methamphetamine. So you can see that it's really difficult. So those are things when we talk about these child endangerment issues on dealing with all these types of meth labs and even the environmental hazards. You know, each pound of manufactured methamphetamine produces about 5 to 6 pounds of hazardous waste, and they have to do something with it. And a lot of time they'll dump it into a trash can or in a commercial dumpster or put it in a water system or whatever. Talk a little bit about combating the prescription drug type issue. So, drug diversion is by definition the rerouting of drugs from legally and medically necessary and authorized uses to that are illegal and typically neither medically necessary or authorized. Now, we're going to talk, I mean, this kind of fits into prescription drug diversion, okay? In 2012, prescribers wrote 82.5 million, or I'm sorry, yeah, 82.5 opioid pain reliever and 37.6 benzodiazepine prescription per 100 people in the U.S. So read that again. Prescribers wrote 82.5 opioid pain reliever and 37.6 benzodiazepine prescription per 100 people in the United States. So you can see the problem. And the issue, however, with this is that many of these prescriptions end up in the hands of those who don't need them and were not prescribed them in the first place. And yeah, part of it is due to something called doctor shopping, and this is when a patient goes in and obtains a controlled substance from a healthcare practitioner without the prescriber's knowledge. And this costs the system about $72 billion per year. So, I mean, these are issues that we're dealing with. And the most commonly abused type drugs out there are pain relievers, tranquilizers, stimulants, and sedatives. And we even have a point right now where we're getting what we call pharmacy robbers. And these are people that walk into a pharmacy, jump the counter, and they're armed, and they don't really take money, they take the drugs. They might take the money, but really their job is to kind of go in there and they're robbing these people and they're taking these different types of drugs. So you can see that this is a big deal as well. And what about strategies for underage drinking? Well, without question, alcohol is the most commonly used and abused drug among our nation's youth. Alcohol crackdowns merely basically just kind of displace the location of drinking. And you can see through some photos, especially in some college settings, that it's kind of an okay thing to do. You know, some state actions that have taken place, well, enforcement of legal drinking age of 21 years. Administrative license revoking, meaning if we find out that you're selling to minors, we might revoke your license. Some people say lowering the legal blood alcohol limit to 0.08. Mandatory screening and treatment of persons convicted of driving under the influence of alcohol, or even primary enforcement of safety belt laws. So these are all some state actions that we've kind of, you know, gone over. Some other collaborative efforts might be empowering residents by coming up with, let's say, a citizen coalition to help deal with it. Instructs and mobilizes communities to partner with law enforcement. Maybe improving the physical environment in some of these areas by improving indoor and exterior lighting to keep people around, or doing cleanups or things like that. I'm not going to go through the case study of the Clinton Hill neighborhood because we really don't have a lot of time to do that. We do know that there have been some grants that have been kind of introduced in recent years. So there is some federal assistance aimed at the drug program. There's a justice assistance grant, there's the drug-free communities program, and there's the community-oriented policing program. All of these are out there that can help local law enforcement deal with some of their stuff. We talked about a problem-solving partnership, meaning crime, drugs, and the American dream are integrally, you know, they're kind of all related. When we look at things like conservative crime control, this is, where it comes down hard on crime and wages war on drugs. And then we have the liberal crime control that is looking at broader social reforms intended to expand opportunities for those kind of locked out of that American dream, and kind of wages war on poverty and equality of opportunity and things like that. Okay, so I know that was a lot. We've kind of put it in two parts, but that's okay. In summary, as we kind of wrap up, remember crime and drugs, they are clearly linked. The core components of the National Drug Control Strategy are stopping drug use before it starts, healing America's drug users, and then disrupting the market. And we talked about a lot of different ways. And some of those ways or strategies for law enforcement includes things like drug raids, surveillance, undercover operations, arresting the sellers and the users, and of course improving intelligence. So with that being said, that will conclude chapter 11, and stay tuned for whichever chapter we're going to move into next. So until we meet again online.